Hello, my name is John Andersen. I'm a board member of the Friends of Netarts Bay WEBS. Today we have a really great opportunity. We have an opportunity to listen to Stephanie Craig, who is a tribal member, traditional culture keeper, artist, and the owner of Kalapuya Weaving and Consulting. And she's going to tell us a little bit about the Tillamook and the early history of the Netarts area. So, Stephanie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi John, thanks for having me today. So my name is Stephanie Craig and I'm an enrolled Grand Run tribal member. My family on my mother's side is Native American and I am Takelma River, Cow Creek, Umpqua, Santiam and Yoncalla, Kalapuya, Lower Chinook, a little bit of Tillamook, Chehalis, and a little bit of Mohawk and Iroquois. I'm a traditional basket weaver and I've been weaving over 20 years. I also do consulting for museums and identify artifacts.
That's great. Well, it sounds very interesting. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your connections to the Netarts area.
Yes, so historically and sometimes today, a lot of Native Americans, we didn't marry within our own tribe, and so we would marry within other tribes. And so when we were put on reservations, everyone was commingling, and so it was really easy to marry outside of your tribe. And so my Chinookan family up on the Columbia River intermarried down through here. The Tillamook people did a lot of intermarriages with Chehalis and the Lower Chinooks for trading and hunting and fishing.
Well, that makes sense. Particularly given how the Tillamook were sort of isolated away, that would have been, very advisable on their part.
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about who the Tillamook were or are.
So the Tillamook are the group of Native Americans that lived here. But within the Tillamook, there was little villages. And so you have the Nestucca, you have Nehalem, you have all of those Netarts, Neskowin, and each one of those was their own little village.
Okay.
So many bands within the Tillamook.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about their daily lives, like what kind of foods did they eat?
So here on the coast, there's tons of food. So along with the deer and elk and the salmon and all the shellfish, there was also berries and fresh spring greens in the early spring. There was also barks and different other plants, roots, and other vegetables that were also used year-round. Seaweeds, mussels, clams, almost just about everything that we still eat today.
Right, okay. Well, and I think they ate some unusual things too, like I think they ate grubs at one time,
Yeah.
things like that. Something we don't think about eating today, but when you're in a, looking at all of the options, there it is.
Yes.
How would you describe some of their skills and activities?
So, kind of like today, so if you were a canoe builder, that was your job. Kind of like electricians today, they're not construction workers, they just do electricity. So you'd have women with baskets, and so you might have had one of them, maybe she made the cooking baskets, or there was, a canoe builder or a plank house builder. That was kind of their specialty that they specialized in, and they became masters at those skills. There was also people that stayed in the village to take care of the children or the sick or the elderly that couldn't go out and gather. Women did all the gathering of the food, the men did all the hunting, and they also made all the tools for their hunting trips.
Okay. I see you have some exhibits. You were talking about canoes, and you brought a small one.
I did. So I brought a small one. So this is, the Tillamooks used a lot of their relations nearby of neighbors for ideas. And so the Tillamook canoe is a lot like the Chinookan style ocean going canoe. They used charcoal and elk grease to put the black on the outside of the canoes, and then they used a different material for the red to paint the red. But this is just a miniature one so people can see what they look like. And they would be big enough to fit 10 to 12 people in them. They could navigate the smaller rivers.
So that's probably what, 30, 40 feet, something like that?
Yeah, about.
Okay. It has a figurehead on the front. Does that was the norm to have?
From what I have found, yes. I'm not a carver, so I don't know too much about carving. I'm a basket weaver, and I brought some basketry.
Tell us about the baskets.
Yes, to show. So this right here is called a tule mat, and it was very versatile. We also had them here out of cattail. And so tule mats were not only used for seating in your canoes, but it was also your bedding. It was also your room partitions. It was also, we used them to dry our food. Our summer camp, if we were just going out for a couple of days, we would take cattails or tule and we would make mats like this in a shelter to stay in.
Okay.
In the cooking or the food houses or huts, they were made out of tule and cattail instead of a wooden house.
Oh, interesting.
So they stored their food in there.
Okay. So, and you tell us a little bit about these baskets. I mean, there's some really pretty features on some of these.
Yeah, so I brought these in. So this is I call it a reservation era. It's after contact. So obviously Native Americans, we didn't use purses. We didn't need purses back then. But when everyone came over and settled, they wanted to have stuff that reminded them of home. And so what they did is they commissioned the Native women weavers to make items. And so this is one here where it's made out of local material and traditional weaving style techniques. It's just the shape of it is different. And so, and you can tell it's been used. The junkus, that is the material, the handle is starting to break off of it.
Oh.
So, and then this one here is a same era, so after contact, probably in the last 50 years. It has a plastic container, like a cookie container inside, and the weaver just wove around it. But I brought this one because it's really interesting. It shows intermarriage in trade. Yeah. So with this basket, it's Tillamook, but it's also Chehalis, Lower Chinook. And the reason how we know is, so if we look at the bottom of it, the cattail, and the cattail's all the blonde, and then you've got darker materials going up, and you see the cattail, and then we have dyed beargrass. So beargrass grows at 1,100 feet elevation, and so here on the coast, that was traded in from a neighboring tribe. And then the dye that is used is commercial dye, and then cattail, a rush, or a sedge, sorry, was also very local up here. And so to me, the basket tells a story of either the mother was Chehalis and the father was Tillamook, or vice versa, because of the materials and just the weaving technique with it. And so you can see it's got faded green and red geometric shapes on it, but it's just a fun little little basket. And then I brought some tools. So this is a really cool tool. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Digging sticks, I've seen.
Yeah. So this is a digging stick. Some people call it cuppins. It just depends on what tribe or where you're from. And so we use an elk antler tine, and we used hardwood, and this one I believe is out of ocean spray. And you drill a hole in the center of the elk tine, and then you carve your wood, and at the bottom of it is a point. And we use this I bring out and I have 2 big tables and I have all family heirlooms and old stuff and I talk about it. So intermarriage. So this is the style of basketry of the upper Columbia River, Columbia Plateau. They have,
Yes, I've seen a lot of that.
yep, corn husk flat bags. This was actually given to my great-great-grandparents and it's over 130 years old.
Wow.
My mom's sister had it and she said she was done with it and so she gave it
Wow.
to us.
How nice.
Because I'm married to a Umatilla tribal member, but so that's the style, and then this is their style too. This is called a wuppus, which is just a root gathering bag.
Oh,
And so this, if you look in, you can see plant fibers.
oh yeah.
That's
right.
Did you point it toward the camera once?
that is milkweed or dogbane, or people used to call it Indian hemp. So that's what, if you look at this, the little brown right there, and it's the
Oh,
ends of it. So that's the same material. Nowadays they use jute and yarn, but so this is that style. Now this one is from the Willamette Valley because it's got juncus. However, it's the same shape and size of
Well, that's what I was just going to say.
a wuppus.
Yeah.
So this basket tells me that the mother is they probably live in the Willamette Valley of the mother's people. She is Kalapuya, and the father was from eastern Oregon, so either Warm Springs, Yakima, Colville, Umatilla, Nez Perce, any of those tribes. Because of the style and shape of it isn't that, but the materials are all Western Oregon, Willamette Valley.
Interesting.
My husband, when he comes to classes and talks, he teases and tells about how we had an arranged marriage. We didn't. And brought him over. And so our daughter, we have a daughter who's 2.5. She will be doing stuff like this. So she'll have, because of all the tribes that I come from, she'll incorporate all of that under baskets, but she may make these, flat corn husk bags with juncus instead of corn husk, or vice versa. And so it tells a story of the person. This is a ladle, and this is made out of old growth red cedar. So upriver on the Columbia River, you see them made out of horn and wood, or bone. And the Tillamook's here carved them out of wood, but they also traded and had bone ones or horn ones. And you can see there's a little design that goes around on the handle. So this would be used for serving soups or stews or food, or a personal drinking cup.
Okay.
But
That's great. Well, let's see. I guess I should ask, how would you say the Tillamook's culture differed or was the same with other tribes that are in the area? And how would you say that you could distinguish those?
so you would be able to distinguish by language for sure. So the language is completely different than the tribes that were around. So all the Tillamook, Salish speaking, all spoke the same language, slightly different dialects or different words. It might be in different villages. And then as you go out, there's different languages spoken, and so there's a big change there. Within materials, you see a change in materials that are used. So like juncus is from the Willamette Valley.
Oh,
And so that was traded in predominantly from Willamette Valley. What was the rest of your question? Sorry.
well.
How's their lives different
Right.
from? So it changed when contact came from the ships. a lot of intermarriages with other tribes to secure trading networks, hunting, fishing rights, and even passing through their land. They would marry into that tribe to create relationships, especially if they were going to war. That way they'd have allies with them to help. They're influenced by all the tribes that they were connected to, either through trade or hunting or marriage. So you would see a mix, a little bit of a mix. And with trading, they might go up to Celilo or Willamette Falls and trade with the Klickitats for dried pounded salmon and a burlwood bowl. And then they'd come back home and then trade it off down south on the coast to someone else. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of similarities and a little influence from other tribes.
Okay. Well, and there was a long period where there were white traders coming on ships primarily, I think.
Yes.
And but after that period, there was actual settlement, mm-hmm. and white people became part of the environment here.
Yes.
How did the Tillamook react to that?
Well, just at the time, it wasn't a good time. It was the 1800s.
Yes. And
the Donation Land Claims Act was approved, and Oregon was open for settlement. We were taken from our villages and we were removed and put on reservations at Siletz or Grand Ronde. Families were split up. My family specifically, I have relation at Siletz. Half of the family went to Siletz, and when that was filled, then the rest came to Grand Ronde. So sadly, it was very common. Being forced out of your homeland and removed and made, to go hours away from where you're from. The food is different. The materials are different. Your medicine is different. The patches that you've worked for generations on harvesting from, you can't go back to those. It'd be like today if someone came from the East Coast or down south and showed up on your doorstep and said, "This is mine now and you need to go." It wasn't a safe time. A lot of women and children and men were forced out and killed if they weren't willing to leave. So it was definitely a hard time, and a lot of sickness came through, epidemics, pandemics, and it wiped villages out in some places.
I know there were some who managed to survive here in the Netarts area. Oyster harvesting is always brought up. Also in some of the other areas around Tillamook. And what was their life like?
So the ones that were able to stay, a lot of them intermarried into the white society so that they could stay in their homeland and survive. A lot of them married trappers or traders or merchant seamen. When they retire from the ships, they just stay on the coast most of the time. So that saved them in a sense. They didn't have to leave their villages or their local land base. And some of the men were very nice and allowed them to continue their traditions, and some forced them to not be Native American anymore and live a white life. Some of them did okay and succeeded and was very successful, and some of them just were heartbroken and it didn't work out for them.
Well, I know they talk about different groups, and in the Netarts area, for instance, the oyster harvesting was done almost exclusively by tribal members, female tribal members. It would appear to me that there was a certain amount of exploitation that occurred there. I mean, they were allowed to stay, but they became, let's say, employees.
Yes.
And there was a definite us versus them kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay, so you're agreeing that
Yes, it is the same. So in the Willamette Valley, the same goes for farm workers. So my mother and a lot of our family was bused from the reservation when they were young kids out to farm fields. It was cheap labor.
Cheap labor, yes.
And the same thing at salmon factories up on the Columbia River, and fishing vessels on the coast. It was cheap labor. They didn't have to train anyone. The women knew what they were doing. They had a job and they needed money to feed their families. So it made complete sense for them to do it.
Okay. How would you say that the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde is connected to the Tillamook and to this area?
So when in the 1850s, when the treaties were being signed by the government and the Indian agents of Oregon, they brought parts of the Tillamook people to Grand Ronde. And they also took Tillamook people to the Coast Reservation, or the Siletz Reservation is what it became later. So there's a mix of Tillamook's and then intermarriages and stuff. I, for one, am part Tillamook, and I'm enrolled at Grand Ronde.
Wow, okay. How can we, all of us, better honor the legacy of the Tillamook?
That's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question.
So-
That's why I saved it towards the end.
Yes. So there's different ways of doing it. It would be great if the community, maybe starting in November, Native American Heritage Month, and you have a speaker come, or you have multiple speakers once a week come, and the community comes together and listens to what's happening or what happened. We're still here, and I'm sure there's still a few Tillamooks left here in the area. Working with the local school, you could do like a welcome back or a friendship dance around the solstice or summer or spring, welcoming back, a new birth after winter.
Right.
You could do, I'm really big, I have a museum background, and so I really love interpretation and exhibits. Interpretation signs of your community. If you have any interpretation community signs, like, what bay this is and a little history, why not put a little piece of the Tillamook history? It doesn't have to be overpowering, but just a couple sentences just to include it. Or put markers out in places that are in public space that are, it would be allowed for community and non-tribal members to be there. Obviously, if it's a grave site, you don't want to put that out there. You don't want people to know about it because it's a sacred spot. But on the bay, I could see a sign, and it would be really cool to have a picture of the oyster woman. She's gathering her oyster shells, and it, and it talks about
Right.
the history and how we're still practicing and tending the land like we are today. Just little things like that are easy to do, and it makes impacts.
Good.
So
Well, I'd like to see us follow up on that, and that's, I think, something for another conversation, which we can have in November.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think that's all we have for today, but I sure appreciate your coming, and I hope the folks that have a chance to see this video appreciate the Tillamook and the important part they played in this community.
Yes. It wouldn't be Tillamook if it wasn't for the people.
That's right.
It'd be named something else.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.